So, welcome, Kevin Livingston, to the premiere of the Outer Line retrospective, sort of a look at some of the newsmakers of years past and in the sport of cycling. And Kevin, first, welcome. This is the maiden ship for the podcast on the Outer Line.
Thanks, Steve. I didn't realize that, the premiere. All right, no pressure.
So people might say, well, why Kevin Livingston? And I say, why not?
There you go. We have a little history too, though, so we know each other pretty well.
Exactly. So what have you been up to? I think, when you look back at Kevin Livingston's career, people remember him obviously as an elite road rider. They remember him for coming up and, through the ranks on development teams, going on to a pretty stellar pro career. And looking back, how do you view your career? And what do you think was sort of the apex of your career?
That's kind of a big word for me, Steve. Would that be the peak of my career?
That would be the summit. That would be the king of the mountain. That would be
the goal or the summit. There's a lot of debate there.
That's true. How about the summit?
All right. Pretty loaded question. Maybe what my immediate kind of reaction when you ask that question is thinking back. It's been about almost 18 years since I retired. Remember when I first stopped racing, I sort of had this counter going where I would be like, okay, it's only been 1 year since you've been retired. Like everything, you're still close to your pro career. It's only been 2 years. You're not getting that old. All of a sudden I'm like, whoa, my kids are older. I'm like, it's been 18 years. I think initially I think a little bit about how, I stopped pretty young. When I look back, I ended my career at like 29. I wasn't even 30. So that's always something. And I think I found that people did seem curious about that. Why did I stop, at 30 or, why didn't I race a little longer? And obviously I thought about that too later, but, and just going back, touching on just stopping, I think I can't explain. I know when I was younger, I kind of had this idea that I don't know why that I would race till I was like 30. And that just seemed at the time what a lot of guys were racing to that I followed, and I don't know if that was kind of self-fulfilling but then too, just where I was at that time with racing and with my life and like, definitely having children, having my daughter, huge as part of that decision, changed my life. What I tell people a lot is it was just more of like a gut thing to stop. Like I can't really explain everything, and it was just a culmination of things. And basically, I say like flying off the side of the mountain was no longer meant for me to keep doing it. It's a dangerous sport. So
you had a interesting career where you were on the American team, right? And then you went over and almost was viewed, like a little bit of a Darth Vader figure, like, hey, you're going to the dark side over here. And so looking back on that experience and then riding for Ulrich, in the Tour, what was that like, as an American?
No, definitely was a interesting time, being on those first two winning Tour de France teams with Lance. And then, a lot of, obviously there were a lot of questions about why I left the team. And, at that time, I look back, I sort of explained, like, I had an ego too. Like, I know, Lance comes under a lot of, scrutiny for just obviously how it's out, how various people have been treated or out in the public, some of the problems that, he's had with other people. But at that time, I think a lot of people thought that him and I had this big falling out, and that, but it was really more, I felt like I'd proven myself in the team, that I had value, and that I really didn't need to go to Lance to ask to be on the team. And that wasn't it either. They offered me a 3-year contract, and but I was getting better offers. I got better offers from other teams, and I felt like I'd proved myself. I didn't need to go asking to stay. And I also, looking back, had lot of time to reflect, on those times. And it also was his team. I don't blame him. We were 2 years. He had the same guys. It's kind of rare you get like the same nationality of guys too. We had a big American presence in that team that was strong and that was helping him win those tours. And if I was him, I would have been a little nervous too that eventually guys aren't going to be able to keep up that level of performance. So it was his team; he could do what he wanted, and it's not like I got kicked out of it or anything. It just I made a professional decision. I had an ego, like I said, about what my role was. I was proud of what I felt like I was capable of. So I feel like I got a little lucky because I tried to jump to another team. It was a smaller team, that Linda McCartney program. You remember that? Pretty soon after I'd sort of officially signed that they already weren't paying riders and there were all these problems. So I I got to work on breaking that contract. And once I broke that contract, I had a friend who he had been my agent before, and he put out some feelers to other teams. And kind of fortunately for me, uh, Telecom was it was right after the Vuelta, and the team had gotten a little nervous. They weren't very, totally happy with all the support. They felt like Jan needed more support in the mountains, Ulrich. And so it was like kind of perfect timing when I made that jump and needed a team. So I talked to a couple other teams as well, but the Telecom was it felt good. Like they really wanted me, and they made me a great offer, and it was a great team. They took really good care of me. It was cool to go to that team, because you still sounds funny, but you're 27, 28 years old, but you grew up as a kid, like looking at these cool, like foreign teams, and like even just the cycling kit and the bike, and like you still got excited about things like that. And it was a different experience. And I was a bit of a novelty. I was the first Anglo-speaking rider in the team, so there was a lot of curiosity, I think, about me having me in the team.
And first of all, of course, you have to have someone who's strong enough to wear the yellow jersey, and that was Lance. And then Lance needs some support from his teammates. And I think the team did a great job.
You look back, your friendship with Lance, which was probably deeper than the average cat coming up in that program. I mean, between you and Chan, it's arguably you were as tight with Lance as anybody coming in through the ranks, as early as probably 17 and 18-year-olds on that Skittles team. Was that strained at all when you made that jump over to Telecom, or did you say it was just a business decision? Everybody understood it at that time.
No, yeah, no, for sure it was strained. I mean, let's be, we'd had a really good relationship, but as through that second tour, it just could kind of feel things changing a little bit. And like I said, me just I think too not going, really not wanting to go along with the plan of what I guess like I said, they gave me the offer, but I sort of made a decision to move away. And I mean, I kind of think at that period, he's going on to win another 5 tours after that. Like it's kind of like, well, what do you expect, And it wasn't. I don't know. It might have been a year later or later the next year in the um, group that we talked a little bit. And but then, fast forwarding, I was thinking about it, just trying to remember some things, and I was like, my last season, I came home from Europe, and my last race was going to be the San Francisco Grand Prix. And I remember that him and I was on Telecom, obviously T-Mobile, and we actually trained for like 2 weeks together. He was on, I don't even remember the teams now, what the sponsors were, but we trained together in Austin for like 2 weeks and just kind of back a little bit normal. We've never really talked about that together. So it kind of just went by the wayside, I guess you'd say. But yeah, I didn't really know, my first real memory of Lance. Obviously I knew him, who he was, and I can think back to being a junior. But was in 1991, I was on the junior national team, and the junior worlds that year were in Colorado Springs. So it was like a really big deal. Wanted to make the national team to ride the worlds. And I'd spent the spring over in Denmark. I graduated early, and I'd spent 3 months over in Denmark racing in France. And I felt like I'd really kind of proven myself. I actually won the Danish Junior Worlds trials. So if I was Danish, I would have been on their Junior Worlds team. But that wasn't good enough. The national team coach, he told me before the start of the trials, the Junior Worlds trials, which were on a sort of a Garden of the Gods, like a portion of what the World's course was going to be, but not the whole circuit. He just came up to me and to my face. He said, "If you don't win today, you're not on the team." And I mean, I was like pissed. I was like, I felt like I'd proven myself in France and some other races. And so I went on to win that race by 5.5 minutes solo. So, but going back to my kind of first interaction ever really with Lance was I went back to the Olympic Training Center. I was staying there, and I took a shower and stuff up at the dorms. And I went down to they had that awesome mess hall or whatever you want to call it, with all the sponsors, peanut M&M and things in there for us. And I walked in, and he was sitting at a table in a booth with a coach or with some other guys, I don't know. And I heard this guy, "Hey," and I looked over, and it's him. And he's like, "You that little kid," or whatever he called it, that just kicked everyone's ass out there? And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Hell of a ride, man. Good job." I was like, "All right, man." Lance Armstrong just congratulated. So that was like my first sort of interaction being with him. That was like 1991 sometime.
You, Bobby Julich, George Hincapie, I think Marty Jemison was right. There are a lot of guys in that era beyond Lance. Some strong personalities too, looking back, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned those names, and you think about the different, um, like Marty, I always think about how him and I were roommates and at the Worlds in Norway. And, we did some spring trips, those different groups of guys. We used to go to Europe in the spring and race, big races like the Bergamasca, which was the big lead in for the pro teams doing the Tour of Italy. So we got to race against some really big riders. And yeah, we definitely had a strong group. It took a few years for us, like myself, to start intermingling with the older riders like Bobby Julich or Lance.
If you look back on American racing, that was sort of the race where a lot of you guys became prominent. If you looked at the results, as I recall, Bobby Julich was fifth as a 19-year-old in 1991, in Tour de Pont. And Lance, of course, went on and won the event a couple of years. And, you showed well. And George won stages. And you guys were young guys at that time, 22,
Yeah.
23 years old. What did that event do as from a confidence builder, noting that you had teams like PDM at that time and Panasonic, some of these big, they're the top teams in the world coming over the US and competing. What did that do for your confidence? How did that kind of carry over and set up into that Lance era for you guys?
No, that was definitely being in the national team. You think back like the order of events or the way the seasons would lay out, but being able to make that team and be in the Tour de Pont. Like I mentioned before, we had kind of always like that spring trip, and then we would come back and ride. I rode it 2 years, but the first year was so abbreviated. I got hurt. Broke my pelvis. The first stage was Wilmington to Delaware. It was like a half stage, I think. And then the evening stage was a team time trial, and I got hurt out warming up on the course. And then the next season, thinking through the years here. So, that's when I was like, I really felt like that year. I mean, it's easy to say now, but I had such a great Bergamasca. I was in the front group with guys like, I think, Eugenie Berzine went on to win the Giro that year, and I was placing in the top 10 on the climbing stages. And I felt really prepared for Tour de Pont that year. And, that was a really competitive group too. I mean, if you look at the guys, they've all had long careers. And so we definitely motivated each other. When I looked that year, that was the year George made his pro contract, 93 he turned pro in '94, and you couldn't help but compare yourself to that. And getting hurt that in Tour de Pont that year was a big upset for me. I felt like it really set me back like a whole year. And so the following year, I had a really good. I think I was 17th overall and like the second top amateur rider in the overall Tour de Pont, and that was a good segue with some other results that led into my sort of pro contract.
When you're able to really drill it on a climb, and a lot of the top pros will say that if you can hold your threshold at a 15-minute pace, you're kind of at a Superman level, maybe up to 20 minutes. And you said when you were at your fittest, so maybe this was 2001, 2000, right around that time frame, going 20 minutes, on a major climb in the Tour de France, you were able to hold it with anybody, and you felt that physiologically at that time, and just the way you were conditioned mentally and physically, you were able to push that at that limit. What did it take to get to that level? And physiologically speaking and mentally speaking, I think when when you're in a Tour de France level race, it's a different psychology, I think, of how you're pushing yourself. And look back at that and tell me, when you're at your peak form, drilling it and looking at shattering the rest of the peloton, what that was like.
Yeah, I'd say for the most part, I felt like I had pretty good success in the Tour de France. I rode it 6 times from '97 to 2002. Yeah, to think about, when I do think about the tour, I definitely think about certain moments. And you think about, wow, it was 6 times 3 weeks long, but you put a lot into like, wow, that was a really good 20 minutes. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it came at a high cost, like you said. It's really hard to explain how, yeah, you go 20 minutes, 30 minutes on a climb and you're riding for the team or riding for yourself, just trying to stay in a group. And you destroy yourself. The next day is a flatter stage, and so you can have some time to recover and hopefully be better. But yeah, when you're on like that, it's a great feeling, obviously, but you're so on mentally too focused. Like the tour, I don't want to go too sideways here, but whenever I think about or explain to people like the difference between the Tour of Italy, the Tour de France, and the Tour of Spain, it's like at the Tour of Italy, you get the feel that after a while, you kind of know the couple guys who are in contention. The echelon, the wins come, the group splits. Later in the race, the group starts splitting sooner. Similar thing in Spain, and it's very like culture dominant. Like the Italians obviously get really excited, just like we would for the Tour de Pont, get really fired up. But I think the Americans have always adopted the Tour de France as that race for us, to be really going well. But at the tour, like it just, no one gives up. It's like that, they talk about sports, about competing against guys that are the same level. And then it takes so much. It's a pretty awesome display of like when there's a split in the peloton, it was going all out for a long time, and it was very difficult, So it's pretty cool. Like there'll be echelons, there'll be single row of guys for like an hour, no one's getting dropped, but nobody quits. There's never a, sit up. And so that's kind of the intensity of the tour. I also say too, like the battle to be in the first 20 riders you can't explain it. You let up a little bit, you're in the back. You could spend 30 minutes trying to get to the front.
And a lot of guys spend their whole career just literally leaning themselves out, back to your point, sometimes for 1 or 2 stages that define their career.
Yes.
And they're not even winning a stage. They're just playing a role.
Well, in a way I did that,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I think of my performance, the team's performance on the day that Lance won Sestriere that year. And, my effort on the Galibier, like brought it down to like 4 or 5 riders, and that was like a 30-minute effort. I think my heart rate was 202 for the whole time. About 5 beats below my max or something. Um, but yeah, I was on and I had a good day, and I've had a couple other days like that. But when you add it up, it's like an hour and a half of efforts that really made big difference in the race.
And so when you look back at those defining moments in your career without any individual, you know, adulation on that, or is it enough to look back and say, "Hey, I did my job for the team"? And I think that's what, for super domestiques out there, there's not a ton of them, right? I mean, being honest, year to year, there's probably a handful of them that are doing that in the Grand Tours. So, what did you take away from that in a sort of a parting shot in your career, being that super domestique for a couple of years?
Well, I think there was a point there, probably 99, like where I'd made, really there was that team aspect that we had, and kind of, I must have made a decision there that I was going to take on more of that role of. I mean, I tried to win other races, I had other good results, and before the tour, or sometimes just after. Um, but I think I'd made it. I must made a decision. It was like that was kind of like my spot, like in the profession. It kind of goes. It's not so much anymore about when you're a kid and you're trying to win all these races, and you try, and sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, and it's a lot more competitive at that level. And I feel like I found a spot to be really beneficial in a team, and I was content with that role of helping. And never really liked the word domestique, but it's all right.
I think you've been pretty honest when people have talked to you about drugs in your era, and what that was. And it's a difficult topic, let's face it. And I think as people look back at eras, uh, and depending on what testing was, even in those eras, is becomes debatable. You talk to different people within the realms of pro versus amateur, and you get varying degrees of opinion. So, as you look back on that era, what's something that you can take away, or that you'd like to share, I think, to people, on where that era was, and maybe where and how it's helped cycling in any way.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad you asked that question. It's a little, definitely a difficult question, but I feel like in a way, the lead in here, you kind of allowed me to talk a little bit, just a little more about my career, without that hanging over. I might have said just in the very beginning here of our conversation, when you asked me to start talking about my career in that time, because my first reaction now really is when people ask me about my career, where you're kind of like giving me credit for, like, my performances and the results we got, but we both know that they've erased some of those results from the history books. And yeah, and then the doping was a part of it. So having gone through the years of, I'd already been retired, but when it kind of came out, it just became evident that there was doping and who was doing it and what was going on. And see if I can keep my train of thought here. Uh, I think when people initially now give me like credit, like, "Oh, you were an awesome rider and you're a pro rider," I immediately think about the doping. I think, yeah, but there's this big asterisk. You definitely can't get around that. And so it's definitely even a black cloud for me, like over my own career, because no one, when I got called in front of the grand jury and I was deposed, and you just don't ever think that's going to come to that. Like, I remember when I was going into the grand jury, and I was outside in Los Angeles somewhere or whatever. I just couldn't believe, I was like, how did I get to this point in my life? I was like, this is terrible. Like, it was embarrassing, and you do regret it. I did regret it, and you regret your decisions. But at the same time, like I said, I've had a lot of time to reflect, and it's kind of like it's my life. It was my story, it was part of the story. And where I am today with my family and just all the experiences I've had, you can't really go back and like fix that and make it better, but you can learn from it. But yeah, definitely, you know, growing up wasn't on my agenda at all, man. You know, I look at my kids right now and you think, you know, my son's like 15, he's starting to ride, and he loves lacrosse, you know, and I just was so I like cycling so much, like it just consumed me at like 14, 15 years old, you know. And you know, I had dreams of wanting to be a pro rider. And so I think back to, I was telling you, I lived in Denmark in 1991, and man, it was so depressing. Like I was by myself. I remember I didn't even have a watch. I'd wake up in the middle of the night. I had no idea what time it was in this room. And I had a great family. They took great care of me. But I, even at that time, I was so, I just wanted it so bad, you know, to be a professional rider, that there was nothing that I was gonna, you know, let get in my way. So if I go through the years there, you know, 91, and you kind of like create that path as an amateur, doing these races, trying to get recognition, and then you turn pro. And as an amateur rider, I won some big races. You know, I won a big stage, mountain stage in Tour of Austria, and that's pretty much what got me my pro contract. And I didn't know. I'm sure I was racing against guys that were already doing stuff, you know, when I was an amateur. But it was pretty evident when I turned pro in '95 that something was wrong. I was like, man, I must have pulled the biggest, you know, what would you call it? Somehow it's like I don't belong here. I was like, these guys are way better than me. Like this pace, the pace is way different than the amateurs. A lot of that too is just the level of rider, right? The guys filtering through to pro are just like pretty much like you were. You're the top of your national team, or your, you know, that age group. So they're all like that. So it's no longer like a national team of like two really good riders and then maybe filled in, and but it's like all top riders. But it was
Is it
pretty obvious, you know, those years it was um, definitely evident that, you know, as the year went on, even just that first year, it was kind of like 95. I was like, what is going on, you know, and then start to figure out that something's up. And then yeah, just kind of, it's kind of a slow, you know, it became a sort of this slow thing into deciding, you know, like first something like cortisone. Oh, cortisone is, it wasn't even, now you would get suspended for that. But back then it was legal. So it's like you didn't even consider that doping, you know? So you're taking cortisone when you're, for inflammation, or you might have something happen to your knee, or it also helps guys lose weight. And then you kind of move on to, oh, here, this, you know, this, and I knew what I was doing all along. Like, I take complete accountability for what I did. I mean, I'm not a dummy. Even at 22 or whatever, I knew what the drugs were, what, you know, what I was doing, what I was choosing to do. So, um, and then I felt like definitely, yeah, a big decision was to start taking EPO. So that was, you know, that was a decision that kind of weighed heavily. That, to me, that was like crossing the line. You know what I mean? Once you did that, you were like, you're kind of in. You're like in the club. Like at that time, you know, I hate to put everyone in this, you know, say everyone was doing, but I'm sorry. Like, and I got this question too when I was, you know, being, like I said, in front of the jury and being deposed. Like, I can't tell you how I know. I just know. I lived in that world. I know what I remember. I know, you know. So,
so there's a little bit
it,
of almost like a maritime to that. Like you've heard that in other sports too. And let's not always pick on cycling as much as everybody always does. There's a little bit of a maritime in other sports as well.
yeah, and I don't want to downplay it, like try to like push it off and make it
Yep.
all, you know, rosy and okay. I'm just telling you my story. Like,
You know, it's more gray than it is black and white. Is that a fair assessment with what you know now, looking back and knowing that other groups, other individuals are doing it or did it, that it's for the general public, that it's a far more gray area when it gets very specific to physiologies and the way the application of certain drugs are. And to your point, certain drugs were not banned that become banned, and it's become an evolution as well as fact finding, as well as some of the testing catching up to, you know, some of the things that were banned currently?
Yeah, that's Steve. That's tough. Like, yeah, I think it's black and white. Like, we're breaking the rules. You know,
As
we
far as the
were.
rules go, but I mean, as
Yeah,
far as the drugs
definitely
as far as the
crossed the
drugs
line. But
themselves
we,
is what I'm
I,
asking.
yeah, I wasn't thinking about it like that. I was thinking, I want to beat these guys. I know this is what everyone's doing. Like, I want to be competitive. I don't want to be a pro for 2 years and be done. I mean, that's what it would have been. I would have been done. I mean, I can say that. I would have been. Nobody would have signed me. I
Yeah.
would have done 2 years and been done. Um, and yeah, and some insight into the drug, like, it wasn't really as glamorous as it sounds either. It became almost like a part of the routine. It was like part of the job. It's like, okay, I drink my shake, my protein shake when I get home. Um, I stretch. I do my 6 hour training ride. I sleep. I nap. This is what I eat, and it's like, and I take, I make sure I'm take whatever I'm taking, for my preparation of a race. So, not to downplay it again, I'm just giving you some insight to like how it just became kind of scary in a way, just sort of part of the lifestyle. And it was like, okay, I'm going to prepare for this race. I'm going to prepare for this season. And that's pretty bad. That's, you think about it like that, it is a slippery slope, where guys can really get in trouble with their health and make some really bad decisions. Um, I feel like I was, definitely I had more thought about this a lot more after those years, like maybe 10 years ago or so when this came out. I definitely had a lot of, some pretty dark time of like reflecting and really questioning why I made those choices and things like that. But, and also just the effectiveness, like you just don't take them and you're like Superman. Like, that's why I say that it became kind of like the routine. It's almost like you're doing the same efforts, like same suffering. There's the same, but the biggest thing would be I would say from like a drug like EPO is sustainability of efforts and recovery. Because I did have races early on where I did okay, like pretty good performances my first years where I wasn't using EPO, and but those were like few and far between. It would take me forever to recover, and I didn't even know. Like, if I had known, I would have raced like I would have taken 3 weeks between races to recover and really be ready, so I could at least be competitive for a day or two. But you still got to do everything right. You still got to be right on your race weight. And it's not like there are these magical things that are just, taking guys that are, terrible riders and making them into these great, great riders. So.
Got up to you raced at probably 148 to 155 at your peak, and you were up to about 200 pounds. Some of that muscle, and this
Yeah.
in your point, a little girth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Very
how
generous.
the hell did you get into that? It's just pretty interesting. I know you got a wrestling background from high school, but what attracted you to that? It seems the polar opposite of cycling.
Yeah, I don't. When was it? I did that pretty soon after I'd stopped racing. Somehow I came across this school and I was watching, just watching the Ultimate Fighting on TV and figured I'd give a run at. I think in the back of my mind I thought I was going to be like an MMA fighter, after my pro career, but I learned pretty quickly like, no, that's not a good career. I did. I don't know, 5 or 6 years of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. A lot of that was, like you said, I just think my background from high school or junior high of wrestling maybe drew me to that. But I don't do that much anymore. I stopped a while ago.
I was just interested more in the thought process of saying, "Hey, I'm going to go from 145-pound climber to."
Well, we talked, you and I have talked about this on other times. We've been with each other over the years, but I feel like just the last year I sort of figured out this whole weight thing. I'd say, because yeah, I pretty much my whole life I've always been like, I had to really work to be that light, and I know the guys do too. The current guys, they work really hard to, power to weight is so important. And these guys, they're man, they are lean and they're small guys and they can put out a lot of power. And we thought we were. I think they're even leaner now and somehow lighter, smaller, but and probably to do with some of the advancements of the ways to do it. And man, right after I stopped, I mean, I was like 180 pounds by like November of the first year. I hadn't even officially run out of my contract. And so and it's funny here to sit here and talk about weight because I've kind of moved past that. Like that's was such a focus when I race, and people be like, "Why are you always talking about how much you weigh?" Like people find that really odd, you know. Like obviously over the years with my coaching business, you know, I've been coaching since I stopped, and so I've had a training studio for like 12 years where we do indoor cycling. Obviously, right now we're not. It's we're doing live stream. I'm doing live stream classes, and you know, I've always written training programs for people. Uh, and really, a lot of people come to me and they want to lose weight. They're like, "Hey, I want to get in shape." That's what a lot of people tell you. And a big part of that is always wanting to lose weight. And you know, I look back over the last year, about a little over a year, I've been studying fasting. And when I say fasting, that's kind of a scary word because it gets people like, "Whoa, I don't want to like not eat. What are you talking about?" So I've kind of called mine like primal eating frequency, you know, like low eating frequency. That's really what I ultimately coach people into. And it's pretty simple, you know, it's like one meal, 2 meals a day, and then big periods of time, you know, between your meals, and even the occasional longer fast, 24, 48 hours, something like that. But I just feel like we were doing that. I even did it in wrestling, you know, when I was a kid, and we just did it wrong. And then looking at the pros, you know, definitely as an amateur, I mean, I raced at like 165, 170 pounds. And then when I turned pro, I lost, you know, 15, 20 pounds. So I just remember we had some aspects there of like I coach with my fasting now, but we just did it really poorly. And we kind of sabotaged ourselves. And I look back and I'm almost mad I didn't have this knowledge because it would have been so much easier, like not easier, but the method would have been better. Because man, a lot of time you're just thinking about food and you know, that the idea of dieting and cutting calories to me now with what I know with the fasting is just a horrible way to lose weight.
With that in mind, and you're looking at, you know, going from 199, which is what you were, I guess, 18 months ago, and now 165, sandwiched in there was an Ironman and a half Ironman. So obviously, you've got, in a good way, an obsession on working out, but also an obsession on kind of keeping refined as a active retired athlete, quote unquote. You know,
Yeah, trying to. I mean, like I said, I've never stopped working out. You know, over the years, I always been active 5, 6 days a week. I swim a lot. I've always been swimming. Uh, done different things, jujitsu, or hockey, running, cycling, obviously. Uh, but yeah, the weight thing just kind of crept on me, and it started bothering me because it just seemed like every year, or no, it's they say like you can track like 10 years in that weight creep, you know, and you look and you're like, wow, how did I all of a sudden, you don't put on 10 pounds all at once, you put it on over the course of several years, and it just starts to become your new set weight, you know. So I use those that I actually signed up for the Ironman because I was fed up with my weight. And again, I had that mindset of like when I was a pro, oh, I'll do all this training and it'll just take care of itself, you know? And well, one, I don't have all this time for all this training. So I really didn't up my training that much. And at the end of the day on that Ironman, I ended up doing it at like 195 pounds. I'm like, what? At the Ironman, I'm like, you idiot. Like during the run, I'm like, I can't believe you didn't lose more weight. What were you thinking? You know, you got to tote this around now for 4 hours on this run. So between that and the half Ironman, I made some big changes, and that's sort of where I discovered the fasting. I do have a funny story about Jens, real quick.
well, there you go.
Well, the end of the 2001 tour, when the last stage, and Zabel was just a little out of winning the green jersey, like the sprint jersey, you know. And Stuart O'Grady, I think it was Stuart O'Grady, was the teammates with Jens, was in the green jersey, and there were intermediate sprints, and then there were the finish. And the last day is a hard day when there's unfinished business, because the riders sort of, there's like the rules of the riders too, right? Like, are we going to sprint? Because usually it's just a ceremony and no one sprints, and they just do the points on the finish line. And our sponsor had already come over to our bus before the stage start, and there was a green Pinarello in our bus for the awards. And so Jens came by our bus because he's German and he knows the guys, and he kind of peeks his head and he kind of wants to get the mood. We're not making any deals, but he wants to know what's kind of the mood of the guys, right? He literally walks on the bus, sees the green bike, and says something in the German, probably to do with F you guys, and storms off our bus because he knew we were going to sprint all the points and the finish, and Zabel ended up winning the green jerseys.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I think, the final question here is, what has cycling meant for you? And when you have to, you coach, you've been involved in and out of the sport, you were a pro, you've got kids now that cycle, and in these trying times here where the bike seems to be more relevant than ever, what does it mean to you?
Well, that's a little tough question, because like you're saying, these times, I mean, it's definitely, I'm in the same boat, I think, with the rest of everyone, just working through, and obviously everyone wants to get through this period and stay healthy and do the right thing. So a lot of my business is not is not doing great. It's way down, and so it's not like it's. But I see too that cycling right now, it just seems like it's everyone's trying to look, which I love to see. People are looking after their health, and it's great to see a moment of slowdown where people are actually, it does seem like there's a little rebirth of cycling here, of the interest, especially at the level of like health and just activity of families. So I kind of look at this. I hope we all do, knock on wood, it's kind of like a temporary thing of you got to work through it. But I feel fortunate that I came out of cycling, and as you know, I've worked with you with groups like Medalist Sports, and I did some work early on with like Trek Travel and Velosport Vacations, and I definitely feel fortunate that I've been able to string together a continued career doing something that I enjoy. So.
It's been great catching up with you, and once again, good health to your family right now during this time, and appreciate you coming on the maiden voyage here for the Outer Line.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks, Steve. Yep, and the same to you and whoever might listen to this.
No, we can't slow down, nah, 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 nah. We take it to the top, nah, 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 nah.